All right, now, if you ask me, at this point, our background is looking great, but our foreground is just plain boring. We need to make it way more dramatic with the addition of a couple of adjustment layers. We're going to throw in the Shadows Highlights command, and we'll also add a little bit of a gradient. So, the first thing I'm going to do is grab this darker layer right there, the adjustment layer that we created in the previous movie, and I'm going to copy it by pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and dragging it to the top of the stack. And notice, because I have the Alt or Option key down, I'm seeing my double arrowhead cursor, at which point I'll go ahead and drop it into place. Now, that's pretty good, but notice that it's affecting everything behind it, like so, which means that we need to clip it. So I'll double click on the thumbnail for the darker layer to bring up the properties panel. And then I'll click on this clipping icon, which is located in the lower left corner of the panel, in order to clip my adjustment to the landscape layer and thus leave the other layers unharmed. And now I'll click in that brightness value, or I could press that keyboard shortcut of Shift Enter or Shift Return on the Mac in order to select the first numerical value in the properties panel. And then I'll press Shift Down arrow a total of 5 times in order to reduce that brightness value to -100. All right, now I want to make the rocks look a little more yellow and more saturated as well. So I'm going to click on the landscape layer to make it active. And then I'll switch to the adjustments panel and I'll Alt click or Option click on the first icon in the second row in order to force the display of the new layer dialog box. I'll call this guy yellower. Notice, because this new layer is going to be sandwiched between the clipping layer and the clipped layer above it, that checkbox, Use Previous Layer to Create Clipping Mask, is turned on by default, at which point I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I'll select that Targeted Adjustment tool in the upper left corner of the Properties panel. And I first want to adjust the saturation by dragging to the left inside of these rocks until I get a saturation value of +30. Notice, because we're working with the Targeted Adjustment tool, instead of affecting all colors, we're just changing the colors of the reds. Not that there's necessarily any other colors inside this particular layer, but still. Now I want to make the rocks a little more yellow, so I'll press the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and drag to the right to increase the hue value to +10. So we're working on the reds, as you can see here. The hue value is +10 and the saturation value is +30. And now I'll go ahead and hide the properties panel. All right, now I want to bring out some detail inside the shadows. So I'll go ahead and click on the landscape layer to make it active. Make sure you click on the full color thumbnail for the layer as opposed to the layer mask. Then go up to the image menu, choose Adjustments, and choose Shadows Highlights. And that's going to automatically make the shadows brighter, but not really bright enough. So I'm going to take the amount value up to 77%, which looks pretty ridiculous. We have a lot of weird transitions going on, and you can take care of that by increasing the radius value to 200, like so. And then I'm going to take the highlights value up to 33%. That looks absolutely terrible, but it'll look a lot better when I take its radius value up to 200. And make sure to reduce the color value right there to 0. And by the way, if you want to see all these options, of course, you need to make sure that the Show More Options checkbox is turned on, like so. So we've got 77 for the shadow amount, 200 for the radius, 33 for the highlights amount, 200 for the radius, and a color value of 0. To get a sense for what we've done here, I'll turn off the preview checkbox. This is the way these crags looked before, and this is how they look now with slightly brighter shadows, as you can see, at which point I'll go ahead and click OK to accept that change. And then finally, I'm going to add a little bit of a gradient by dropping down to the FX icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, click on it, and then choose Gradient Overlay. And that will go ahead and fill the layer with a gradient, which, needless to say, is not what we want. So go ahead and click on the gradient bar right there in order to bring up the Gradient Editor dialog box. And then double-click on this first color stop. And remember, the color stops are located below the gradient bar. And then let's just go ahead and dial in a shade of brown by changing the hue, saturation, and brightness values all to 20, and then click OK. Now, we don't need white, so just go ahead and grab that white color stop and drag it downward to get rid of it. So you have nothing but this grayish brown inside the image window. Now what we want to do is have the gradient start 100% opaque, as it does, and end 0% opaque. So go ahead and click on that second opacity stop, the one over here on the right-hand side, and change the opacity value right there to 0%, and then click OK. All right, now things are looking pretty gray, which is why we need to blend these colors in so that they're darkening the background, which means changing the blend mode from normal to that foremost darkening mode, which is multiply, and we get this effect here. Now I want it to go the other direction, so I'll change the angle value to negative 90 degrees. And then I'm going to reduce the scale value to 50% so that the gradient tapers more quickly, and I'll also change the opacity to 50%. And we end up with this effect here, at which point I'll just go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. And just so you have a chance of what we've been able to accomplish here, I'll go to the File menu and choose the Revert command. This is what that landscape looked like at the outset of this movie, and this is how it looks now, thanks to the addition of 2 adjustment layers, the Shadows Highlights command, and a gradient overlay layer effect here inside Photoshop.